Tonight's talk is a Dharma talk and not a Teisho, which is a more formal talk. A Dharma talk is meant to expound and demonstrate the teacher's Dharma versus expounding and trying to clarify a koan or a piece of Zen literature. This is the second installment of a six-part series that I have coined Discipline and Inoculation to Life. And this installment is going to be on functional discipline, form, and ritual. And I'd like to start this off with a very famous story including Master Baso. And it goes: in his youth, Baso did zazen diligently every day. Seeing this, priest Ejo asked Baso, what do you expect to accomplish by doing zazen? Baso answered, I sit because I wish to become a Buddha, of course. He had forgotten that zazen itself is Buddhahood, and probably was trying to become a Buddha through zazen. To demonstrate his mistake, the priest began to polish a roof tile vigorously while Baso was doing zazen. Baso had become puzzled and asked, well, what are you doing, master? Well, I'm thinking of turning this into a mirror, replied Ejo. Will a roof tile become a mirror if you polished it? asked Baso. Ejo glared at him and answered, can you become a Buddha by doing zazen? Priest Ejo added, if your carriage stops moving when you are on the road, do you hit the carriage, or do you strike the rump of the ox that is pulling it? Baso did not know how to answer. And this was from a translation from Amore Sogen, who was a Rinzai teacher and Bushido master from Japan, who also founded the first Rinzai, you could say, administrative temple in Hawaii, which is the first outside of Japan. And as far as I'm aware, the last. So it serves as kind of a Myoshinji outside of Japan, or a head temple outside of Japan. And this was his doing. So, in that story, we can really see that there was misunderstanding with Baso. He misunderstood what he saw, and not only did he misunderstood what he saw, he misunderstood what he perceived to be discipline around him. He probably saw all the other monks sitting and thought, well, if I sit and sit and sit and sit, then I'm going to become a Buddha. But there was one problem or one fallacy with his approach. In Zen, we don't sit because we want something. We sit because the act itself is an act of awakening. So, if we misunderstand Zen discipline like Baso did, we can really kind of waste an awful lot of time. You know, you could probably see Baso, and it's not uncommon at all. It's actually very common. I think everybody does it. You know, when we start sitting zazen, if we're very earnest, you know, we want to sit more and more and more and more. And for the most part, for us, it's a healthy thing because we probably don't sit as much. But you could kind of think of this Baso, really wanted it, you know, and thought, well, you know, the more I sit, then, you know, that must equate the closer I get to awakening, you know. So I can kind of, you know, get it before everybody else, so I'll just do twice as much zazen. So he misunderstood everybody else around him and thought that they were doing zazen to get awakened, to become Buddhas. So he thought, well, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it even better. So he disciplined himself twice as much. But he ran into a problem because he misunderstood the situation. And he misapplied discipline, with no really end result other than an awareness that, you know, by just disciplining yourself or by just sitting zazen, if you're doing it for the wrong reasons or a misinformed reason, then you're kind of just spinning your wheels or standing, running in place. You're not really getting anywhere. So I wanted to talk just very briefly about the first part of this Dharma talk, but since there's so much information here, there's no way I can possibly go back and cover it all. But let's go back and just look at the definition of what discipline is so we understand exactly what I'm talking about here. So the dictionary, the Webster's Dictionary definition of discipline is control that is gained by requiring that rules and orders be obeyed and punishing bad behavior. There's also another two definitions. One is a way of behaving that shows a willingness to obey rules and orders. Behavior that is judged by how well it follows a set of rules and orders. So we could see by that last one, it kind of seems in step with Basso, right? Behavior that is judged by how well it follows a set of rules and orders. So what he sees is he sees just discipline. And he sees, well, these are the rules and these are the orders. If we do Zazen, then we get closer to awakening. So he thought, well, if I do even more, then I'll get even closer to awakening, or I'll get there before other people would. But he misunderstood, because there is no goal, there is no desire within Zazen practice. There cannot be, by definition, because that is a pursuit of the ego, not a pursuit of letting go or opening to the way of Zen. So behavior that is judged. So he thought, I'm sure, if people see me as well, and I see the awful lot of this, in the monasteries, somebody will be sitting out in the open to be seen, doing Zazen while everybody else is doing something else. And again, I'm not in any way kind of degrading doing Zazen when people aren't. Because I think it's a wonderful thing. I think for most of us, doing more Zazen is a very positive thing. But sometimes it can actually be a hindrance for us. And we see people that are they want to be seen. They want to be seen adhering to the rules. Because what they want is they want some kind of affirmation. Good job. You're doing really good. You're really pushing well, You came down, after, session close and you did yaza. Oh, very good. Very good. But what we find is we don't get that very good. We really don't get anything. It doesn't really seem like people care at all, And that affects us if we are doing it for some kind of approval or some kind of recognition or some kind of goal or some kind of prize in the end. These things really affect us. So these things are very kind of normal and ordinary. But they're also things that we learn from and we move past, and we really begin to kind of deepen our insight into really what Zazen practice is. Now, and if we remember in part one, discipline, and in our last one, our first and last definition, it says control that is gained. So when we look at discipline, that's a very good definition of it, control. Most people that undergo discipline want some sort of control. They want some sort of outcome, desirable outcome. So they undergo these rules and these orders in order to acquire this control or desirable outcome. That's why people, discipline themselves. Whether, we could even use the word which is many times used in an endeavor of a field of study. We could say like the discipline of philosophy, or the discipline of theology, or the discipline of music. And again, there's definite rules and there's definite structure within that that allows us access to some kind of specialty or some kind of end result, even if it is, music or philosophy or any of that. So we use discipline in order to get from point A to point B, for the most part. This is how we use the idea of discipline. And when we use the term discipline within Zen practice, it should be done very loosely, because we'll get to in a little bit, really what you're seeing is not discipline. Because if we look at the definition here, we have control that is gained. What control is gained? know, well, what is gained? What is lost? You know? And then we have a way of behaving that shows a willingness to obey rules and orders. Maybe so, but you can see there's some issues with these definitions, some serious issues with these definitions from a Zen perspective. Or the last, behavior that is judged by how well it adheres to rules and orders. Yeah. So maybe not so, but we'll just kind of, you know, leave this word as kind of open but very suspect right now in Zen practice. And one of the things that many times happens is we are motivated to engage in some form of discipline in order to escape something. You know, whether it's to discipline ourselves to escape feelings of inadequacy. You know, maybe we want to discipline ourselves or make ourselves better so we don't feel this way. And again, there's nothing wrong with these things as though they are abnormal. But being aware of why we do these things and the result of our approach is imperative to understanding, you know, why Zen practice works and why some things don't work. You know, judgment and willingness to obey rules and orders and gaining control, well, these things, you know, really don't work very well in Zen from this perspective. But, you know, a lot of times we use this discipline to really escape some form of displeasure or suffering. So again, there is a desirable outcome, which leaves this idea of discipline in Zen very suspect so far. Very, very suspect. Now there's something else called asceticism. Now asceticism a lot of times is used synonymous with discipline, but it's not the same at all. Okay, so discipline is a structure. It is a structure of rules and goals that are adhered to get to some kind of point, whether it be, you know, the embodiment of a school of thought, or you know, to stop smoking, to, you know, could be anything. But asceticism is different as it is rigorous self-denial and active self-restraint. So basically, asceticism, its historical context, is a practice by which somebody denies themselves of worldly goods in order to become more spiritual. Right? So self-mortification is part of asceticism. The Buddha, you know, when he was in his ascetic practice and you know, kept a stone under his tongue and only drank the dew off the forest floor and wouldn't, you know, eat live plants but ate dead vegetation on the floor. These are ascetic practices that are designed to punish or break the body or to create some kind of discomfort in order to purify the body to become more spiritual. So that is something that is not very Zen Buddhist or Buddhist at all, these ascetic practices in this manner, and its kind of highest sense. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. All religions really have a form of discipline and asceticism because, you know, it's kind of the definition is perfect for most religions. You know, when we hit behavior that is judged by how well it follows to a set of rules or orders. I mean, these are like commandments and your basic church tenets. And, you know, if you adhere to them very well, then you're a very good Christian. If you don't, then you're not so great of a Christian, right? So a lot of times, you know, discipline is kind of imperative for religion because it is that structure. You know, it is the commandments. These are disciplines. You know, thou shalt not kill. Really, when we say that, it is a discipline. Thou shalt not lie. Thou shalt not steal. These are all disciplines. Every single commandment is a discipline in itself, right? Because if we remember, it's rules or orders to be obeyed. So these are rules and orders. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. shall not covet the neighbor's wife, all of these things. These are all disciplines, right? And asceticism we find too. I found in Matthew, and I looked and looked and looked and looked to try to find this, and I knew I would find it in New Testament. Old Testament is really easy to find, the ascetic practices and that, because there's a lot of it. But the one verse I found was from Matthew, and it said, "If thy right hand causeth thee to stumble, cut it off, and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not the whole body go into hell." So we have the basic groundwork for the idea of what asceticism is, which is to break the body in order to become more spiritual or to reach a higher consciousness. And it's not different at all from Hinduism. And all these religions and Islam. I didn't have a chance to go into each and every one of them, so I just kind of picked a couple. But, Hinduism, of course, because this is where the Buddha got his ascetic practice from the Shramana or from the Brahman at the time, not Brahmin, Brahman, meaning a holy man. A Brahmin is a caste, M-I-N. Brahman is a man of Brahma, or a woman of... I don't know if they had female. They did have female Brahmin, but I'm not sure about the Brahman. The ascetics would be interesting to research, but anyway, sorry. But so it's a Brahman is a holy man, an ascetic holy man in India. And the Vedas actually say in there that the gods got their powers from asceticism. There's something called tapas. Tapas is actually a heat that's generated by the gods and by humans as well, that comes from self-admonishment or some kind of self-punishment. That this tapa or this heat is generated, and it's said that the gods actually got their magical powers from this tapa, from this heat that's generated through asceticism, through self-denial, self-discipline, self-mortification, basically by harming or inflicting pain or suffering on the body, that somehow, the gods got these magical powers. And of course we see this now too, in India, even to this day, they have these big carnivals. One of them is called Holi. Holi it sounds like holy, but it's Holi. Holi is a festival in which all of the gurus basically get together. It's like a spiritual fair at the Ganges. And like all of the great gurus and ascetics are like present. And you kind of go to your guru if he's there, or you go and check out all the other gurus. So it's like this big guru carnival, where you could like find new and improved gurus and all of this. There's one guy, and where was I watching this? I can't remember. It was a show, but this one guru basically like held his arm up in the air, and he did it for 30 years. And now it's just like this, like shriveled up, like it's not even usable anymore because he held it up and propped it up. It just atrophied, and the bone is just... This is asceticism, right? And supposedly these things, even though they harm the body, you would think now he can't use his arm anymore. But from the Vedic perspective, this generates tapa, and tapa generates supernatural powers. So that's why they do this, because the idea of tapa or the idea of supernatural powers appeals to people. Look what I could do. This is something, otherworldly, or this is something that's, above what normal humans can do. So we in turn see this, and it's something that we don't see all the time, and we kind of, think to ourselves, at least a lot of us do, wow, this is amazing. How does he do that? Or people that never talk. They keep that stone under their tongue and they never speak. Or there's ones that grow their fingernails out. They never cut their fingernails. And, there's ones that live off of corpses off the Ganges. And they drink alcohol. Like, they're drunk 24/7. And, yeah. And they're common in India right now. They scavenge bodies that are being burned, at funeral sites. This is considered asceticism, right? Because we say, oh my God, how could you do that, But to them, it is a way to aspire to become a more spiritual person, right? So this is the idea of asceticism. It's really kind of stems from the ability to have a control over the body and the human condition, right? Because when we can show control of something like that, many times innately we feel as though we have mastered something. Now we have control. I can do this. Look at me, because I can, you know, lift my arm up in the air. And I'm not denoting what he did at all. I'm just, from a Zen perspective, you know, again, we're kind of looking at why we do these things. And, you know, there's kind of dual. One is that, you know, you think, wow, look at all this control he has. His spiritual prowess must be great. And for him, he's like, look what I've done. See me. You know, look, because these, a lot of times they don't hide, because that kind of negates the whole, you know, the whole ascetic discipline of being seen and people saying, wow, that's unbelievable that he did that. But we can see there's some motivations behind asceticism, you know, which is kind of like, look at me, and also look at what I've done. Which stands kind of in contrast to a Zen perspective of, you're not going to look at me, please, I could care less if you look at me, you know, and I've done nothing. What is there to do? You know? So it stands in contrast, and a lot of people have an idea that somehow this is asceticism. It's not. It's not. We're not harming our bodies. You know, we're not mortifying our bodies. You know, we're not doing things in order to be noticed from everybody else. We're actually doing the opposite and trying not to be seen. And when we sit, we shouldn't be, you know, thinking of what our gain is. You know, like, oh, I'm going to have tapa now. I'm going to have, you know, this supernatural heat that's going to give me these powers, or I'll have the power to control my mind, and I'll be, you know, I'll be so happy then because I'll be in control of the world around me as well. You know, so if we're thinking that way, you know, there's an issue. Because what self is there to control what? So a lot of times traditions can implement asceticism in order for preparation for some kind of holiday or some kind of ritual. Now this is something that's a little bit different, right? Lent. Lent is a form of asceticism. It's not as severe as the Baba holding his arm up in the air like that, you know, for 30 years. But Lent is still giving something up, even though it's kind of a very, you know, mild version of asceticism. It still is, you know, giving up meat or giving up a certain kind of food or not eating, you know, after dark or anything like that. This is really a form of asceticism. There is some discipline that's required, but really the goal is self-denial. Remember, there's a difference. You know, discipline is not about self-denial. That's not the goal of discipline. But it is, as far as asceticism goes, self-denial is primary to asceticism. You know, things like, too, like fasting. Fasting is a form of asceticism, you know, that we find, and I think probably almost every religion that I know of has some form of fasting. And we could say that that's a form of self-denial, but we could also look at it from a Zen perspective, and I'll kind of demonstrate. Well, from a Zen perspective and from a discipline perspective, again, we're using discipline loosely, but just to move it away from asceticism, we could say, well, hey, you know what? I'm not doing this to deny myself something. I'm doing this because this is something that is healthy. You know, this is something I'm doing not because I want to get something, but because I know it's good for me. And it's good for everybody else around me. You know, so it's not self-denial, like I'm going to deny myself these pleasures, right? But from a Zen perspective, it's not about that denial, but it's about the benefits of it, the positive benefits of it. And if there's not some kind of, and I don't mean egotistical benefit, but I just mean general benefit about it, you know, and if there's not that and it's harming us in some way, well, then it's not really a Zen practice whatsoever, right? Because we're not into, you know, extreme self-denial and self-mortification and all of that kind of stuff. That's not Zen at all. One of the other forms of asceticism that we find is punishment. I mean, think about like the old movies, the old black and white, you know, movies with, you know, during the Renaissance period and the Inquisition. Think of the Catholic monks down in the dungeon with the cat o' nine tails. Whoosh, whoosh. Do you remember that? Do you ever see pictures of that? They would actually whip themselves, cat o' nine tails, you know, bloody, and in order to beat the evil, or to punish the body so that the evil leaves the body, so that they become pure, so that the body becomes pure. Right? I don't know how much or how well that worked, but it didn't seem to stick around very long. But we could see, you know, and again, this is done as though we are lacking something. There's something wrong with us. That we need this. That we need to do something in order to be better people or to be more spiritual people. You know, so there's that goal in there, or that outcome. And there's that perspective that we're lacking something, that we need this. Not that it's healthy for us, and that we're going to do it because we have faith that it is good for us in some way, you know. But no cat o' nine tails. And then, you know, a lot of people, when they see like the Kosaku as well, if we think about that, what's the first thing people think of?
Discipline.
Punishment.
Yeah. Punishment.
And they think of asceticism. I'm going to beat you to make you a more spiritual person. Really? That's what people think, because that's the kind of Christian mindset of this culture, is the old cat o' nine tails on the back. They see the stick and they see a monk being struck with a stick, and automatically they assume that it's because they were bad or because they needed it. You know, that somehow it was like a purification, you know, the ceremony or process. Then we need to tell people, no. It's because your back really hurts, and Kosaku means stick of compassion. And they're like, oh, okay. But we could see the difference between that. It's not punishment, you know. Even the old days with the shippeis and stuff, monks getting hit with sticks, it was never about punishment. Never. It was always about compassion. And sometimes that meant just can't get through with anything other than, you know, striking you so you are shocked by it. And that shock hopefully, you know, kind of unsnags you long enough so you can hear what I'm trying to tell you. But it's never done out of punishment, ever. But that's the way that people perceive it because they don't understand. Just like they perceive sesshin as a punishment or some kind of period of trial by fire, you know, in which you're purifying the body by, you know, experiencing all of this pain. It's not. That's not what it's about. It's about faith. And it's about opening oneself up to the process willingly, because we know that it is good for us. Not because there's something wrong with us and that we need to be punished or purified, you know, or we need to punish ourselves. But that it is good for us and we have faith and conviction that this is what we need to do. So, you know, and a lot of times, like I said before, you know, the supernatural powers are like, You know, and they're even in like old Theravadan literature. There's a lot of like supernatural powers that the Buddha got. You know, probably some of you have heard of them, like being able to remember past lives and stuff like that. And, you know, and this is really a throwback to a lot of the ascetic ideas, you know, that by, you know, these severe austerities or by these, you know, the severe asceticism that you gain these supernatural powers. But it is not Buddhist at all, as we'll see as we go through, where Buddhism is not about hurting the body or harming the body, but about strengthening the body and strengthening the mind primarily. Layman Pang, and I said this actually for the Ordinary Mind is Tao when I did that Dharma talk. Layman Pang said, my supernatural powers are drawing water and chopping wood. Those are my supernatural powers. So we could see kind of Zen's play and outlook on supernatural powers. No, you don't understand, you know. It's the process, it's living through it, it's opening yourself to it, you know, that we find benefit. It's not about acquiring anything, any supernatural powers, or even wanting anything like that, but being able to see the wonder in the everyday and the ordinary. So why do people misunderstand and misapply discipline in spiritual practice? Well, I kind of jumped the gun a little bit, and I talked a lot of our cultural trappings, especially being from a Christian culture. You know, we have the idea that we are born into sin, so there's something wrong with us, and that the flesh is weak and the body is weak, and of this world, and that somehow we should rise above all of this and break our body in order to liberate our mind to become, you know, a spiritual vessel of God until we die and are whisked away to heaven. So that's a lot of the reason why we kind of perceive discipline, you know, in a kind of very narrow confines, and it's more of asceticism really than discipline that we see. But from a psychological perspective, there's a couple reasons too why misapplication of discipline occurs and misunderstanding of discipline occurs. One of them is something called repression. Have you guys heard of repression before? You sort of like repressed memories or anything like this? And this is something that's very tricky because it's unconscious. We don't even know that we're doing it. And what's happened is there's some kind of idea, there's some kind of memory that is so unacceptable that the conscious mind can't deal with it. It's too extreme for it. So what happens is the subconscious basically walls it away from the conscious mind and deals with it behind the scenes. And you hear me many times talking about how much energy it takes in order to maintain the wall around these repressed ideas and repressed memories. So one of the things that happens is when we have these repressed ideas or repressed thoughts, a lot of times we're not even aware that we're doing it, but we're aware that there's something that's off. And that's many times why a lot of us end up in Zazen. We end up in therapy. Because we know that there's something off. We know that our energy is not totally our own, but we can't quite put our finger on it. And what happens is repression only lasts for so long. And then it builds and builds and builds and builds. And what happens is it becomes so out of step with reality or the present moment that there's kind of an impending disaster in which the walls are going to break apart and this repression is going to come forward into the conscious mind. A lot of times we're aware of that, and it's a very scary thing for the psyche. And what happens is there's kind of like a response to build the walls even stronger. So we'll pick something that strengthens, that we perceive will strengthen ourselves or strengthen our energy in order to keep that repressed memory at bay. And a lot of times these tools that we use are based in discipline. because we're looking for something to make us stronger. We know there's something off, you know, and you know it doesn't matter what discipline it is. You know, it could be anything, you know. But basically, we pick something in order to strengthen ourselves, so that we can keep this repressed memory repressed. And a lot of times, it becomes very extreme, because the repression, the idea, or the thought begins to well up and we begin to panic. So what we do is we push more and more and more to discipline ourselves, to get that strength, that power. And again, it's not that we see what we're doing, but what we are doing is we're looking through discipline for some kind of strength to keep those floodwaters at bay. Because there's a part of us that is so afraid. And it's that part of us that is compelling us to do these things. It's not our conscious mind that's compelling us, you know. And hopefully in Zazen, you know, which is our therapy, and we are our own therapist, and we're sitting there and we're kind of having this neat little dialogue with ourselves, you know, watching ourselves and watching our thoughts and watching these things arise and these weird fears and irrationalities arise, that we see them. Because we're really the only ones in Zen that can treat ourselves. Right? So a lot of times through Zazen is kind of like the therapy or the detox for these things. And we can work backwards and work through a lot of these repressed ideas and feelings that are really robbing us of a lot of our energy, because it takes a lot of energy just to keep them at bay, and it takes even more energy to consistently keep them at bay, which means all these things that we have to do and we can't figure out why we have to do them, and we can't sit still and we can't be with ourselves. More than likely it's because we're afraid to be with ourselves, because there's some subconscious awareness of a repressed idea or repressed ideas, which means we have to get away from ourselves. So we have to go out and we have to find some discipline somewhere. We have to learn something new. We have to get a new car. We have to, any of these things, you know, to kind of keep these things at bay and to discipline and strengthen ourselves so we can keep these things repressed, so we can keep ourselves sick, which is unfortunate, but it happens. Okay, so the second thing is something called compensation. So the definition of this is compensation is a process of psychologically counterbalancing perceived weaknesses by emphasizing strengths in other areas, right? So here we have our perfectionists, people who have to do more than everybody else, or people that have to go past what is the norm. People that sometimes almost seemingly are disciplining themselves almost to the point of asceticism with things. You know, that they just are so consumed by whatever endeavor that they are participating in, that they just push themselves ragged and beyond any kind of healthy point. And a lot of times with compensation, it's also about punishment. We feel as though we are inadequate in some way. And what we're going to do is we're going to punish ourselves by pushing ourselves to an extreme in order to purify ourselves. And this takes amount of discipline. And we could see how discipline could work against us, right? Think about this, because of some small, area of deficit, a lot of us, and we all do this to some extreme, these things like repression and compensation aren't things that are abnormal psychology. They're not abnormal at all. They become abnormal when they become dysfunctional in one's life, but we all do these things. Let's make this clear. It's just the extent that we do them. We all compensate in some way. But a lot of times it can get out of hand. And we see this with a lot of, again, like I said, a lot of overachievers, a lot of perfectionists, which I can be very much a part of. you know, is we push ourselves almost to the point of punishing ourselves because of our perceived deficits. That's almost sad, right? Right? Instead of being able to sit and enjoy, or to be at peace with what you've done, and to say, well, I'm not so good at this. I know, I wish I was, but I'm not. And not have to be, oh, well, look at this. I'm really good at this. Look how good I am at this. Don't look at this over here that I'm not so great at. Here, look at this. Look at this. And that's what a lot of us do, you know, is we really try to compensate. And spiritual practice and discipline are no different. Zazen is no different. Any kind of religious practice is no different from this, where there is a great deal of compensation. You do not believe how many people call me and say, well, you know what? My life's absolutely hell, but I know I can do that. I know I can be a Buddhist monk. my life's horrible. And it's not that I'm laughing at them at all, but I'm just laughing because out of compassion and understanding the suffering that their life is just so out of control. But, you know, I can do that. I can do that. But the perception is that it's some form of punishment, or it's some form of discipline, as though there is something lacking once again. I can push myself. I can hurt myself. I can do that. You see, it's sad, isn't it? But you would not believe how many calls I get with that one statement. I hurt and I suffer, but I can do that. Because I'm used to hurting and I'm used to suffering. I can do that. I can do that to myself. So it's pretty sad, but, you know, at that level, but at some level we all compensate in some way. You know? So watch perfectionism and having to overachieve at things, because it is a tell sign of compensation. You know, not being able to do what everybody else is doing, but having to do more than everybody else. Not being able to relax at the status quo, but, you know, I mean, sometimes it does work for us, but you know how many manic depressives I know, or bipolar people, I should say, I'm sorry, bipolar people that I know that are also great compensators. And they can push themselves in their manic phase beyond reason. They're highly successful people, mostly. But in the end, it always destroys them. I have one woman who was one of my first students in Tamaqua. She was bipolar. Her mother was a psychiatric nurse. She was a head analyst for the CIA. Bipolar. Now she runs, well, I can't say because that would be confidentiality, but now she runs like a motivational group. But I mean, super overachiever, big achiever. But there was issues behind all of that that pushed her to that point. To having to do that, to feeling the need to overachieve, to feel the need to compensate. So people saw her as okay and worthy, so she in return could see herself as okay and worthy. Because without that approval from other people, she couldn't approve of herself. And this is the way that compensation works. So sometimes it's interesting, because being, you know, a perfectionist myself, I'm learning over the years now to do the minimum sometimes and be okay with things not being perfect, you know, which is something that we all learn. I think we all have tendencies, you know, to do certain things. And this is one of mine. And the beauty of it is one of the reasons, or one of the ways that I realized this was exactly this practice. These are things that we realize about ourselves. And these are things that we come to terms with and say, okay, this is who I am, but that's okay. Doesn't mean we don't work on it, of course we do, but it's okay, you know. So we all do these things, you know. But discipline many times is not the answer. There's nothing wrong with us. We don't need to punish ourselves. We don't need to push ourselves to extremes either. We shouldn't have to do that. That's not what Zen practice is about at all. That's the wrong way to Zen practice. There's something wrong with me, or I want something approach to Zen practice, not the true approach to Zen practice. So another way is controlling my behavior. A lot of people use discipline because they feel kind of at turmoil inside, and they kind of feel out of control with their inner feelings and their inner conflicts that is actually much easier to learn to suppress these things, to repress these things and suppress these things through discipline than it is to actually face them. So what I'm saying is it's much easier for people to learn to ignore them, or to put them at bay, or to create some kind of exterior facade of discipline where we no longer become reactive. We no longer let people through, but we have this kind of ease of control about us. And a lot of times this is kind of discipline gone awry in the sense that we use it to hide behind. It becomes nothing more than another crutch and a wall to keep our inner world at bay, and to keep people in the exterior world from seeing how we really are inside. You know? I'm not going to tell it again, but you guys have heard me tell this story about the kid when I first went up to Daibosatsu. This guy, he was a monk, and he looked so beautiful the way he sat, and I just thought this guy was like so awakened. And you guys have heard me tell that story, right? And they're like, have you talked to him? Like they knew, but I didn't, you know, because I'm like, wow, this guy's so disciplined, and he never talks, and he never hangs around, he never makes mistakes. And I talked to him, and it was just, you know. It felt like, you know, like an animal in a trap trying to gnaw my leg off to get out, to get away, you know. But it's a great lesson in people using discipline in order to hide behind and not in a Zen manner of opening oneself, using discipline to open oneself and to let go. Do we have time? 6:53. 6:53. Wow, I'm just no good. This is like page 2. Well, there's no way. I guess this is going to be 2 parts. Part 2, A, B, C, and D. Okay. So we'll do like one more thing, and then we will, yeah, this is going to have to be a book, I guess. But it's still important. It's still important. So, there was one other story, and I guess I can share, and then we'll talk a little bit about self-discipline, and then we'll end for today. But and I've told it before, but I just want to tell it again because I think it's a very pertinent story to what we're talking about. And it's a story about a Catholic priest who was an alcoholic at the Allentown Diocese here, and I've known him for a long time. I actually met him when I was a drug and alcohol counselor for treatment trends, the Keenan House in Allentown. And he told me his story some years later. When I met him, he was teaching a college class. Well, actually, I didn't take his class, but he was at the college that I was attending. He was teaching a philosophy class, and he shared his story with me. And I knew he was in recovery, you know, from before, because he speaks at meetings, and some of the meetings at the Keenan House he would speak at, and so I knew he was in recovery, but never really what his story was. And basically his story was that he was a priest for 23 years, a Catholic priest, high-ranking Catholic priest actually at the Vatican for a period of time, the whole time a raging alcoholic. And I remember asking him kind of almost instinctively, like, you know, how did your religious practice affect your alcoholism? Like, you know, because there's something in the back of my head was like, wow, he was Irish too, so Irish Catholic priests, my goodness, they're supposed to be drunk, right? You know, so I'm thinking, well, and he told me that he probably drank much longer, much longer than he would have if he wasn't. That his religion and his discipline from, you know, his religious training had basically empowered him to be sicker for longer. You know, and it really goes to show how, you know, discipline really can turn around and become very toxic quick for us. And we should really be careful about what we put our minds to, because it just may come to pass. You know, and if we're not ready, or we're not aware or knowing what we're really, you know, disciplining ourselves to perceive or experience, then, you know, we may be in for, you know, a ride, or we may not get the outcome that we really wanted. It may be something altogether different. You know, and anytime there's really any kind of imbalance in us, or a perceived imbalance in us, you know, there tends to be kind of a severe swing to the other side, right? You know, if we feel kind of very insecure, then a lot of times we'll act, you know, very secure. You know, we'll kind of overcompensate to it. You know, if we're feeling kind of, you know, let's say, if we're feeling kind of insecure, you know, we may act like we know everything, you know. And, you know, we all do this to some extent. But when it comes to discipline, a lot of times if we feel kind of out of control, we can really swing to that far side of discipline, especially if we have tendencies for perfectionism or overachievement. You know, we really can swing to that other side very, very quickly, and we need to watch it. It's almost like a self-righting process you can kind of think of. You know, we kind of know that we're out of balance, and we kind of seek that balance, but a lot of times we just go too far to the other side first. So it's kind of like a seesaw back and forth before we finally find that kind of middle way, as the Buddha did. You know, from a life of luxury, you know, to you know, licking dew off of leaves. You know, so there's kind of like that middle path in between. You know, that, well, maybe luxury and decadence and you know, hedonism is not the way, but, well, hey, you know, neither is you know, punishing yourself or damaging your body. You know, so a lot of times there's, as with Buddha, you know, from one to the other, there's kind of that erratic swing way too far to the other side, and then back and forth. There's the idea of self-discipline. The definition of this is the ability to control one's feelings and overcome one's weaknesses. Now, we can see even by definition of self-discipline, the definition is the ability to control one's feelings. So again, we have control here. So discipline and control seem to be synonymous. So it again makes discipline within Zen practice suspect, right? Because are we really talking control, or are we talking about relinquishing the need for control? So is it really discipline that we're practicing here at all? We have to begin to ask ourselves, you know. So it's a discipline, self-discipline, the ability to control one's feelings and overcomes one's weaknesses. The ability to pursue that which one thinks is right, despite temptation to abandon it. Well, that second part's not so bad. May have some faith, may have some dedication and forbearance. Self-discipline, you know, in self-discipline and self-control, really, again, what we're talking about is that ability to have control over one's life in the exterior world. Because that's what we're talking about when we're talking about control. You know, we're talking about power. And when we seek control through discipline, it means that we're seeking power over our interior and exterior world. So we're feeling inadequate We're feeling like there's something wrong. So when we approach discipline in this way, okay, I'll read one more paragraph and then we'll stop. So, basically up to now it comes to the point that, if you really think that punishing yourself or forbidding yourself something, denying yourself something, is really going to help you to become, more awake and a happier person, I think maybe you need to second think that, or to think that through a little bit more, because it's not going to. This isn't about punishment. Punishing yourself isn't going to do anything except for making, you sicker and fall into this idea of asceticism and deficit, even more prominent in your life. So I'll leave it at this, and then we'll pick up the next time. So, the romanticism of discipline, right? Because this is a big thing. Think about this in our culture, discipline. Think about like the Army, the Marines,
Marine Corps, yeah.
the Marine Corps, the few, the proud, with the sword comes up and they're so disciplined and we're like, ooh, ah. And this isn't taking anything away from them. They work very hard, or we may think of like the days of King Arthur with the knights, or, maybe even, in Asian culture we may think of the samurai, right? So there's kind of this, romanticism of discipline, right? As though it's something that is magical, something that's going to make us even bigger and better, There's a paragraph, and this is the last, and then we'll cease for today. And it's by a writer by the name of James Allen, and it's called Above Life's Turmoil, and it's about discipline. And it says, "A man does not live until he begins to discipline himself. He merely exists. Like an animal that gratifies his desires and pursues his inclinations just where they may lead him. He is happy as a beast is happy, because he is not conscious of what he is depriving himself. He suffers as the beast suffers, because he does not know the way out of suffering. He does not intelligently reflect upon life, and lives in a series of sensations, longing, and confused memories, which are unrelated to any central ideal or principle." That's pretty severe, isn't it? Right? I mean, it's basically, so somebody that does not have discipline, and of course, we're not talking about, the Tarzan that was left to be, raised by children in the jungle here. I mean, we all have basic socialization, and we're not psychopaths. Well, hopefully we're not psychopaths. So, we have some basic discipline. That we're not, how does he say, like an animal, gratifying our desires and pursuing our inclinations, happy as a beast is happy. So this is kind of the general idea and romanticism of discipline, that somehow the more disciplined we are, the more refined we are, that the better and the happier we are, and the more powerful we are, but not so. Not so. At least not so in Zen, Because romanticism and discipline is really about pride. It's about what we talked about in the beginning, of wanting to be seen. Look how much Zen I'm doing. Look, I'm sitting when everybody's sleeping, and this and that. This is all about egotism and pride. What is this discipline? This has no place within Zen practice, not by this definition. So, we will pick up next time on something that is related to romanticism and discipline, called false spiritual heroism.